All right, folks, get ready, because we're diving headfirst into some seriously mind-bending math today. Yeah, you heard right, math. But don't click away just yet. Trust me on this. We're talking about incommensurable numbers.
Now, those sound kind of intimidating, right?
Yeah, they kind of do, but stick with us. It's all about quantities that we can clearly see, we can even measure them, but for whatever reason, you just can't express them perfectly using a simple ratio. Like imagine dividing one by the other, and it just keeps going and going
Yeah.
with no end in sight. Our main source for this deep dive is taking us all the way back to ancient Greece.
Ah, the birthplace of democracy and mind-blowing math, apparently.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So picture yourself in ancient Greece for a sec, yeah?
Okay.
You're strolling through this perfectly square garden, just, soaking up those classic Greek vibes, and you decide, hey, why not walk diagonally across the garden, corner to corner?
Seems straightforward enough, right?
Exactly. Until you realize, as the Greeks did, that the length of that diagonal,
Mm-hmm.
you can't perfectly capture it using a ratio with the sides of the square. It's like you can measure both, you can see both.
But their relationship, it's just off.
Yeah, I always think of it like trying to build a perfectly smooth ramp using only Lego bricks. You can get close, you can try all sorts of combinations, but those little bumps, they're always going to be there.
That's a pretty great way to put it. It's like our brains just want to force things into neat little boxes, but sometimes the universe just says, nope, not going to fit.
Exactly. And the Greeks figured this whole thing out with something called a proof by contradiction.
Now, some of our listeners might already be familiar with this, but for those who aren't,
Basically, they said, okay, let's pretend, just for a second, that we're wrong about these numbers. What if they can be expressed as neat ratios?
mm-hmm.
And when they followed that logic through, well, it led to a complete dead end, a logical impossibility, like saying something's even and odd at the same time. Totally nonsensical.
And that's how they knew their initial assumption that the numbers could be expressed as ratios had to be wrong. These weren't just slightly off, they were a whole different breed altogether.
It's amazing how they didn't just stumble upon these numbers. They wrestled with the very idea of them until they made sense.
And speaking of making sense of things, our source also brings up prime numbers, which might seem like a total left turn.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. So how do prime numbers fit into all of this?
Well, they're kind of like the atoms or maybe even the DNA of the math world.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. Break it down for us.
Every single whole number, the ones we all learned back in grade school, if it's greater than 1, it can be built from a unique combination of these prime numbers. It's like a fingerprint. No two are the same. And that's actually a big deal in math, the fundamental theorem of arithmetic.
So we've got these incommensurable numbers messing with our ideas of ratios and measurements, and then we've got prime numbers, like the building blocks of all whole numbers. It makes you wonder, are there even more connections we're missing?
That's exactly the question our source raises. Just like we have these two different ways of looking at numbers visually with those squares, and then abstractly with prime factorization, are we limiting ourselves by not always using both approaches?
It's like Ennard
Yeah,
having two different sets of eyes, right? But instead of seeing double, you see more.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Connections and patterns that might have stayed hidden otherwise.
So what does all of this head-scratching math actually mean for us, even if we aren't, math geniuses or whatever?
Well, for me, it's a good reminder that the world is full of these hidden, beautiful complexities. Things aren't always as simple as they seem at first glance. Just like those Greek gardeners, we run into situations all the time where our logic and our measurements don't quite line up.
It forces us to confront those gaps in our understanding. Right. And ask ourselves, what other in-between spaces are we overlooking? What would happen if we actually embraced the messiness, the uncertainty? Could it lead us to a whole new understanding of things? That's something worth thinking about, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Well, folks, that's about it for our deep dive today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the wild world of incommensurable numbers with us. And hey, next time you think about math, remember, sometimes the most mind-blowing discoveries come from the things we think we already know. Until next time.